All right. I'm back, as Taylor would say. Let me know you can see me and hear me okay. So this is part 4 of building a PHPUnit to Pest converter for Shift. And we're starting to make some good progress, I think. Got kind of a path through, and now I think we're going to start doing some of the fun stuff. So, hey Luke, hey Kaneko, how's it going, y'all? I had a espresso between the last stream just to make sure I was up and going. Always tired as a new parent, so hopefully that'll give me a jolt of energy to get through this second stream. So I'll probably go about 45 minutes. We'll see how it gets along here. So just to recap a couple things that I did off stream. For the most part, everything is being done in one of these recordings, either the live streams that I'm doing or the recordings when I'm pairing with Jess, which I will be pairing with Jess tomorrow morning or her evening, depending on where you are in the world, and I'll release that recording shortly after. So I think everybody liked seeing those the other day, not only the pairing session, but also apparently Jess' magic with Vim, her mastery of that. So we'll get another one of those sessions as well. But anyways, back to what I kind of did offline here. Basically finished up that regex that we were doing earlier. The issue was just a simple flag here for multi-line performance, since it was a multi-line string to chop out that namespace. I also went ahead and built a tiny, well, the beginnings of one of these kind of migration. And these are really going to be the beefy tasks that are moving things over. And we got a lot of this kind of outline from the work Oliver has done on Drift. So basically moving over, like systematically starting to move over the methods that are in your PHP unit test. So things like the lifecycle methods, things like the actual test cases, the data providers, the helpers. The data providers and helpers are probably going to need a little bit of special treatment because we'll probably want to put those in a shared capacity, not necessarily in the individual test, just to make things nice and streamlined. So I think that's going to be a cool convention, something else that Shift would do differently than maybe what Drift might have done, which I think overall is better for like your test suite and seems to be what modern Pest is doing. Like that's the convention that's forming anyway. So what I want to try is get as far as we can on the most beefy of tasks that's part of the converter is actually moving over the test cases. So let's just jump right in here. I'm going to go ahead and make this test case or test methods just to stick with the naming convention I've followed here. And I'm just going to, in the interest of time, at least steal the skeleton of this method here. So let's just call this test methods. And let's replace the name test methods. And we're going to leave that code for now, but let's jump over to the test and kind of do this a bit more proper now that we've actually just built that. So instead of, again, doing it kind of at the nanocycle, honestly, I just don't really practice TDD that way anymore. I do try to write tests first in some of these scenarios, but I just don't, make it fail, make it pass, make it fail, make it pass. I might write like almost the entire test case. Again, after doing that for 2 years, 8 hours a day, pair programming with another developer, I just don't need to do that anymore. If you're just starting out with TDD though, in fairness, try it out, do it that really, really kind of small way. Like don't write any code until you see that failure, kind of like we did in part 1. So if you're interested in kind of seeing me do that, go check out the first 20 minutes of part 1. So let's copy this lifecycle methods. And again, just kind of cheating here, we'll call this test methods test. And let's make sure to change all those as well. Test methods. All right, there's a lot in there. And now let's slow down and kind of build this up a bit. There we go. Okay, so we're going to set up all the stuff we want to do. We're going to mock out shift, the facade. We're going to mock out the log facade, and then we're going to make a subject at which we'll test against. And basically, it's going to do nothing when no tests are found. That's pretty straightforward. This is one of the refactors I did earlier. So instead of doing that raw system find command, I just built a little helper inside of that shift facade. And like I've mentioned before, this shift facade is very much a God class. You can think of it much like Carbon. It just has all sorts of methods in there that help me kind of interact with the system that have been built up over the last 5 years of kind of working on shift. So this will now just be a nice little wrapper for that find command where I can give it the files I want to find and then the paths in which I would want to search those or find those in. So of course, if we run this and find nothing, then it's not going to do anything. That's pretty straightforward, so that's why I copied that test. And now we're going to, it migrates test methods to Pest. And now we want to kind of build out these fixtures a little bit better. Now what's really nice is when I was working on the formatter, the test case formatter for the workbench, I actually have some pretty good fixtures already. So let's go find those and take a peek at them. So if I jump into my tests and then test, let's look at like this format mixed. So here's a good example of where, you know, I have like a data provider, all sorts of different things inside here, and maybe even kind of a private method to throw it off, right? Even though this is prefixed with test, because it's a private method, I wouldn't want to pick it up. So this is this mixed test case is really a nice way to kind of get started, I think. I might do more advanced test cases, again, offline, but I think for the purposes of this stream, this is going to be a really good start. So I want to use this. I'm just going to copy that path, and this will kind of be the fixture we'll start with. So we'll just say, look, hey, if we find a test methods pest file, again, from part 3, we are copying your current test, your PHPUnit test, and then making a copy of that file to a .pest extension, and those are the ones we're kind of incrementally working on, and then we'll put those back or overwrite the original file once we're done. But think of it kind of like a cache or like memory, like we're working on that, building up that new pest test file in memory, and then we're going to overwrite your PHPUnit test with it. Separating those two just makes it a lot easier for me to parse with the syntax tree. I don't have to worry about inline changing it in a place, in a way where it would generate like invalid PHP code. Normally for like the Laravel shifts, I don't do things like this, but because the structure of these is so dramatically different, right? Like PHPUnit, the whole point there is it's this real kind of heavier class-based file. It's got a lot of skeleton, got a lot of setup, whereas Pest is a very streamlined, functional, you know, kind of helpers, all kind of inline, you know, architecture or design or pattern, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so no op is going to do nothing. That's pretty fine. But when we get test methods, we would want to return this format mixed PHP starter kind of file there. And then ultimately we will put this, I'm going to close the chat for a second so I get full screen. We'll bring over this test methods after, and then we would want to append the test methods file with the test methods kind of that we have abstracted and rewrapped to be Pest. So going over that one more time, we're going to get the files that of course are returned from the system since we mocked that out, and then we're going to put the files back, in this case the original PHPUnit file without all of the test methods. So anything we migrated over we're going to pull out of there. So we're going to systematically make that PHPUnit class much smaller until ultimately, hopefully, there's nothing left in there, and again we can safely remove it. So that's the goal of this. And then any test methods we do find, we're going to manipulate those and then append our, you know, stubbed Pest file with those test methods, and then whatever that block of code looks like, we're kind of putting in this fixture called test methods Pest. So I should be able to run this test now, but of course it's going to complain because a couple of these fixtures aren't in place. So let's make sure we're on the right track here. How's everybody doing on the live stream? Send me some stuff in the chat here while we're waiting on Docker and so forth to start up. It's running a bit slow this afternoon. Let's copy just this test file so we can run it. Okay, and as expected, it migrates test methods to Pest, file get contents, failed to open stream, no such file or directory. So that makes total sense. Let's go ahead and copy this over. So I'm going to touch this. And let's run these again just to make sure we're getting all those fixtures going. And of course, that Pest file doesn't exist either. Touch. All right, so now we should get a legitimate error. Put file contents, test method, .php with nothing should be called, but it wasn't called. Now it's saying with nothing because we just touched that file, and of course there's nothing in it. It's just an empty file, and therefore Mockery is receiving a put contents for that with nothing, and that's of course not right. So that lets me know we can break up our fixtures now. So let's go do that. Let's take this format mixed and let's start reviewing it to make our test methods.after file. Okay, so the goal of our PHPUnit file, the original PHPUnit file, that when we're done here would be that all of these test methods are gone. And it will leave, of course, just those blocks of code are gone. Any line breaks or anything, it's not going to clean that up. We're not worried about code formatting of that old file because we're ultimately going to remove it. Now, of course, this private method should stay here. And that's a good example to demonstrate, like, going back to our Pest converter, that when we get down to things like helpers, it should pick that up now, right? So the goal here, again, is we're systematically kind of migrating over all these pieces that we find by parsing out that original PHPUnit file. And as we move them over, we remove them from the original until hopefully there's nothing left. And so each one of these just works, kind of pipe and filter or a pipeline, whatever you want to call it. It basically just does one thing, moves on to the next, does one thing, moves on to the next. And hopefully we've reduced that file to nothing by the time we get down here to make that commit. Okay, so that, whoops, not clear. That should work now. And of course, that put file contents is not going to pass because we aren't, of course, removing those at this point. So I will stop here with the test anyway. I won't go ahead and build the fixture out for Pest just yet because this is my kind of first failure. So I do want to take some time and slow down and kind of get this one passing, and then we'll focus on wrapping up test. So let's go back to our Pest converter, test methods, and let's start building this out the right way, because this code is currently for lifecycle methods. Now it's going to be very, very close. It's going to be pretty much the same kind of, high-level algorithm, if you will, or process. We're going to filter all those methods that we parsed out of the particular file. So if we look at filter methods, this is, wow, formatted very funkily, first of all. So let's clean that up. That's strange that I got that weird line break. That's really nasty. Oh gosh, terribly gross. All right, we'll clean those up as we go along. So filter methods, again, from a life cycle perspective, was looking for any of the life cycle methods. So now we would want to do things like see if it's some kind of test, right? Is it a test method? So what does it mean to be a test method? Well, from a PHPUnit perspective, you can basically have the test prefix, or you can have the @test annotation. So if you meet one of these conditions, you're going to be a test method, and therefore we want to remove it. Technically speaking, we probably want to make sure that you also have that public visibility, right? And that's kind of exemplified in our fixture already, so that's kind of why that's already there. So let's make this happen. So first of all, we could just kind of go if method is not equal, or well, not method visibility. I think I spelled that right. Yeah, we'll find out. Is not equal to public, then we know right away we would return false, right? Okay, so we've handled that. So now if what we would really return here, I guess we could say if method name, we could say, I mean, let's just use the PHP 8 str starts with. I hate that PHP Storm kills that. So if it starts with test of any kind, really, then we know by the rules or conventions of PHPUnit that that's going to be a test case. And then finally, test annotation. We would need to say you're a doc block. So you have to be a doc block, and then the doc block has to contain, or again, we can use the PHP 8 method here for contains at test, then return true. So this should work here. Again, we just turned all that into pseudocode into real code, and we actually should move on a bit farther. So what's going on here? It's actually pretty close. It just didn't remove the test annotation. That's not too bad. Let's make that happen. So I think down here where we actually start to port those over is where I would remove the snippet. Let's see how we remove the snippet. That's interesting. I wonder if the parser didn't consider that a doc block. I want to see if that's true or not. Let's echo, or well, you know what? Let's just go up here and var dump methods. This is going to be nasty, but I'm kind of curious. Okay, so what I'm looking for here is, okay, yeah, it did parse that as a doc block. So why didn't it kill it? That's interesting. It uses a single line test annotation. It definitely found it, which is good. What's interesting is this array only has a few items. I would have expected the private method to be returned here. I'll have to check to make sure that the parser reads additional methods. It might be configurable to include non-public methods. Okay, so why is that little test annotation still floating there? Let's get a clue by looking at format mixed. Okay, it's the very first one. It is line 7, so it should be getting removed. Let's go back to here, and let's echo this out. When in doubt, log it out. It's definitely finding 7. Why wouldn't you remove yourself? Remove segment. Remove line. Ooh, do I have a bug? Do I have a bug where if start equals end, return? I do have a bug. There's a bug in remove segment. It actually doesn't handle scenarios where start and end are the same. That's interesting. Ooh, what to do? Do I fix the bug? Or do I get fancy here? I don't know the widespread. I may be relying upon that bug in some scenarios, so I think the safe, it's a little ugly, but I think the safe thing to do right now would be to say, if these are equal to each other, to remove the line. It's gross, but let's just see if it works. Remove line, start line. I'm surprised that hasn't been caught by something else. I definitely use remove segment a lot. Let's find out. That's not a lot. It's only 10. Okay, well, I'll review that off stream and fix that bug so we don't have to do this silliness, but let's just see if it works. Okay, kind of works. Now it's probably a situation where maybe I just didn't remove the right number of line breaks. Let's look at test methods after. So it should have only saved the line breaks between the number of, so there should only be 1, 2, 3. And I definitely left more than that. So 1, 2, 3, that should be about right. Okay, great. So now it's complaining that the test php.pest is not working the way in which we want. So let's move on to that. And just to kind of get a jump start, let's take this and kind of make it what we want. Let's just treat those like a PHP file, I guess. Or well, no, it'll do some weird stuff if I do that. Cancel. Let's just make it text. All right, so I wouldn't want the test annotation, and it's definitely not before each. So here's where things are going to get a little bit fun. To do checkline. Yeah, exactly. Hey, that's just how I work, you know. I like to keep the keyboard moving. You know, you've probably noticed that. I just don't let myself get stuck on stuff. You know, it takes kind of a long time to get there, but I think if you pay attention to a lot of devs, you know, especially people who you might consider like, you know, very prolific developers, Adam, Taylor, you can watch over time how they've all kind of, you know, they definitely have these things where they'll like just, you know, totally immerse themselves in like a concept or idea, and they'll really think it through. But at the same time, like you'll see that they have, you know, are reaching these places where, you know, the same thing. They just want to like keep the code moving, kind of figure out, you know, what's this and clean it up later. Like you can look at commits in Laravel where maybe, you know, Taylor finished something but then like renamed the method later after he thought on it more, right? But he got it done first, and then, you know, that's exactly the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. Like just keep it moving. Like don't let yourself get stuck. So yeah, it's ugly. Like we can all laugh at the fact that I just did that instead of fix the bug, but again, a lot of reasons why it makes sense just to kind of make it work right now, make the test pass, you know, refactor later when we're in our green to green state. If I got sidetracked fixing that right now, I could have broken things that aren't tested. I just want to stay on point, you know, stay focused on the task at hand and then fix these other things later, because then I can give this all my attention. I can really review each one of those 10 cases, make sure they're tested or see how they're working, and you know, not try to rush anything, especially on a live stream. So let's go back to this mixed format. Okay, so I talked about this on Twitter right before everything here. Let's actually go check the poll results real quick. Whoops, that's not it. Where's my polls here? Here we go. Okay, so actually it's pretty good. I only did it 2 hours ago. I mean, I don't have a huge audience, so 260 votes. It's exactly the way every poll turns out, though. It's pretty much split right down the middle. So I'm trying to figure out, like, what do people want to see, right, when we actually start to wrap these? And, you know, a lot of good votes here, but at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily call that definitive. So what I think I'm going to do is, if you have a test that is prefixed with it in any way, then it'll use it. Otherwise, it's going to default to test. So it's a little bit goofy. Goofy in the sense that I don't like that it's mixed, and I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a second. But I don't think many people will have test cases. Most test cases will probably use one or the other. I'm going to trust that your, you know, test suite follows somewhat of a convention. So if you're doing it, you're probably doing it in a lot of places, so you're not really going to run into this problem. If you're not, you can always use the workbench and pre-format your test cases one way or another. And I'll probably build that to work with Pest after all this is launched. So what I mean by this is this one would get converted to that, And of course, it's going to have the nice handy inline name here. And we'll turn those into spaces here in just a second. Let's finish copying things over. So this would be test, and this is what I mean by mixed. So like this is going to be this, one of them is going to be it, the other one's going to be test. It's, it's a little funky, but I think in the real world you probably won't kind of end up in that scenario. So this one would be test, and it would drop the prefix, and in this case I would probably want to do like something like that. Okay, and then of course the private would not get moved over. Now we would probably kill that test annotation, and then of course this top level test annotation as well. And then finally, let's remove all those and turn them into spaces. So this would be the way I would want it to function. I would want it to pull over the proper, not only pest helper, but also, kind of sentence case, if you will, all of that stuff, like remove the underscores or remove the Studley case or camel case, I guess, in this scenario. And if it found a prefix of test, it would use test, and if it didn't find a prefix of test, it would default to test. In the real world, I would probably default to it, but like I talked about on Twitter, since we're coming from the context of PHPUnit, I think it makes more sense to use the test function, just because the naming is probably going to line up a little bit better. Like if this said, it would say it existing annotations, and that's not going to read well. It doesn't do Pest justice. So I think using test, again, even though the convention in Pest is probably to always use it, or to at least default to using it, I think the test helper is more universal, and therefore coming from PHPUnit, it makes a little more sense. So let's see how this looks. Okay, so of course this is just still calling things the lifecycle method, which is pretty dumb. We can clean that up pretty quick, and it doesn't have that first argument coming across either. So let's try to get these cleaned up with the last 15 minutes we have here. And I keep going to the wrong thing. Here we go. Okay, so we're filtering methods correctly. We're removing the old stuff correctly. That's great. What we're not doing is wrapping the new pest method correctly. So let's start taking a look at this. So pulling the snippet or the snippet or the body of the method out makes total sense. We're kind of getting that indentation level. We're pulling out any kind of, extra stuff. We're wrapping the method. So determined function here is kind of where all the fanciness happens. Now again, this is all formatted a little funky. Let's clean it up. And of course, all the methods are lifecycle method names. So this is where I would want to try to determine what that function name should end up being, right? So we can default, based on that discussion, we can default to test. So really we just need to check the cases where I would want to use it. So we could say, let's kind of think these through real fast. So if the test, of course, started with it in any capacity, we would obviously want to do that. Of course, we would want to do like it should, So, if it does, again, start with it in any way. We wouldn't want to necessarily do that with like iteration though, right? That doesn't really count. So that's like a no, like not iteration. So those are kind of a grouping there. And then we should probably go so far as to say if the method name is test, we would probably also want to, like if it was like test it, or again, test, it should, like we would want to probably do that as well, but of course not test iteration. So I think that's the way we should handle it. In those scenarios, we would want to do, like it. We would want to return it here. So this would be like return it. So let's make this happen, right? So the first thing we could probably just do this with a pretty simple regex, I think. So let's try to write it. Since we'll probably end the stream after this part, or well, whatever. I think we all know I'm a regex whiz, so let's just write this. I was gonna go out to regex 101, but I don't think that's necessary. So basically, if we preg match any kind of test, and then you would have to be followed by, I guess, optionally that. That might actually get a little bit gross. That's going to get a little bit gross. This is why I was going to go to regex 101. If you were test it, let's just do these one at a time. It'll make life easier. I can always combine them later during some setup. So you would have to be followed by basically that or a capital A to Z. And we can just write that all in one. So if you started out, the name started with that. So method name. I hear the chat. Let me get through this regex and then I'll see what's going on in there. So I would say that, and then what could we do with test here? And really this would be kind of like an I or an I, and that would probably allow us to then have this be test. That would probably allow us to do that. Here's the weird one. Testing, or testimony? Is that even spelled correctly? Testimony. No, I'm trying to think of a word that was like that, you know? I don't know what that would be. Test iteration. Yeah. Does it pick that one up? That would be the weird one. Let's find out. Let's just go to regex 101. I should have just listened to my gut. Regex 101. Let's throw these in here. And let's bring our little regex over and see how it does. All right, what does it find? It finds nothing right now. Why not? Test it. Oh, because none of these are the beginning of the line, of course. Let's just drop that beginning of the line bit. Okay, so test it, not iteration. Test it, and it's not pulling iteration because there's not. So you would have to do something like this, and then it would pick it up. And I would argue that's okay, right? That's kind of weird. If someone came back and said, "Oh, I wrote my test this way," I'll fix this. But I feel like this is actually pretty good. So let's drop all that. And effectively, if you preg match that, then we'll return it. And we don't really need to do anything else here. So it's that simple. Determine function is, hey, if you're starting with one of these kind of things, then we'll return it. Otherwise, we'll return test. So hopefully when we run this again, test, and it, there we go. That's exactly what we wanted. Now we just need to work on the other side of the name here. Let me go check the chat. Marion, love these streams. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for joining live. I appreciate it. I'm really, I'm thinking of like doing things like this more often. I want to try to work in the open a bit more. It's been tough with kind of new parent to find those windows, and then of course to have the focus. But yeah, so yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying them. Any chance for analyze functionality in Workbench prior to run the task? Tal, I'm not sure what you mean there. I think you mean like maybe having like the code formatting built into the Pest converter, maybe, I think you mean. And if so, yeah, that's totally an idea. Yes, regex. It's probably one of the, I started, this will kind of age myself here, but I started, the first web programming language I learned was Perl. And Perl, if you've used it at all, is basically just like freaking line noise. Like it's totally jacked up with like symbols and characters. Like it's just gross. But the point is like regex are like first party or first class kind of objects inside of Perl. So I just got really, really good at them very, very early on, and I've just been refining that over the years. When I was a team manager, you know, this probably wasn't totally fair, but it was one of my interview questions for any like candidates was like, are you familiar with regular expressions? And got to be honest, a lot of the times if they said no, that was kind of my bar for, you know, depending on the level, of course. If they were junior, no big deal. But if someone said they were a senior developer and they didn't know regex, I was like, no, that's not gonna work out. So anyway, let's try, I've got about 10 more minutes. Let's try to get that second argument in there. So we determined the function, and now we would do something, this is a bit in line here, but we'll do something like this, where we basically, I'll probably change this to like a sprintf later or something to make it a little bit cleaner. But here we would quote those, and here we could say this dot generate test name, or generate, what do they call that? It's not really the test name. I don't really know what to call that right now. I'm just going to call that generate name, I guess is fine. We'll just start there, and we're going to pass it method just as well. Okay, so this is going to really work very, very similarly to, sorry, just doing some formatting there, it's bothering me. This is going to work really darn close to this. But instead of that preg match, what we're probably going to do is replace any of those prefixes. Generate test description. Oh, test description. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Generate test description. And given that we're in the context of I don't say like determine test function, so we'll just say in the context of this class, generate description, I think it makes enough sense to me. So let's call this generate description. Could have used my fancy refactor tools, but that's okay. So this should be pretty straightforward. This should be, does Laravel have like a sentence case? Can you do like snake to, would I do like snake and then replace the underscores? I guess. I feel like Laravel has, I thought they had like a sentence case. Maybe not. Laravel snake. If anybody in the chat knows, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go browse the available string methods real quick. Camel contains upper UC first, substring, studly, snake. I thought they had like a sentence, but I guess not. That's okay. We'll just kind of make our own, and if we find it again, I'll refactor. So we would want to str, this is probably a good opportunity to use like a, what do they call that? Like a stringable or whatever. But let's just do it the old school way. So I'm going to str to lower, str replace. Let's see here. So the search would be, or well, it's potentially preg replace. This is where I'm going to need some more test cases, but let's replace any amount of underscores. That doesn't look right with the squigglies. There we go. No, there we go. Underscores with a space on the snake case of a preg replace. Oof, this is getting nasty. All right, I'm probably gonna split this out because this is gross. Some people can deal with these one-liners. I can't. I'd rather have like just a huge temporary variable bit going on here, because I can obviously not read this. Okay, let's take a look at this. So we're going to preg replace any underscore from the snake case with removing the prefix of this, and we would want to keep this capital letter here, so we would do $2, let's call it, and then close that down. Now I'm missing a curly, I assume. Yeah, there's my last curly. Nope, need one more curly. Oh yeah, method. Snake and method are all duplicates. There we go. Yes, this is gross. That's very gross. Yeah, yeah, exactly. The stringable would be pretty nice, I think. Or fluent strings, what do they call it? Yeah, fluent strings, sorry, not stringable. Stringable is, I think, the actual trait. Yeah, that would definitely be better off that way. Does replace, though? Will it handle a pattern? Yeah. Gives us, yeah, see. That's the only thing is the pattern. The pattern kind of could be an issue. It's possible that someone had like double underscores, right? So we'll see. Let's just see what this looks like though. Yeah, see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. We need to trim that out. So let's trim. What do we need to trim here? We'll trim the result of snake. No, we would need to trim the result of the preg replace. How did it get something at the beginning though? That's kind of strange. $2. Oh, because it has that. Replace matches. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I'll do that as an exercise, and maybe post it on Twitter, like the before and after with the string, the fluent strings. I haven't used those that much because a lot of my, well, up until recently, Blueprint had to support older versions of Laravel, which the fluent strings weren't introduced until 7. So that's kind of why I haven't really fully adopted those. But obviously, Shift runs Laravel 8, PHP 8, whatever. And now Blueprint v2 will be using always the latest version of Laravel. So yeah, I need to use the fluent strings some more. So I'll definitely look at that. Let's fix this though real quick. We still got that prefix. So the issue with the prefix is this kind of probably needs to be like preg replace callback, because I'm technically capturing an underscore here. I could not, the simpler thing to do would be to like trim this of spaces, and I could trim the str2 lower beforehand, but yeah, it's a little bit gross, but I could do it. Let's just wrap this one more time, nice and fun. So we'll trim this with spaces, or yeah, with spaces, right? Yeah. Well, we don't even need to say that. We can just say that. There we go. I think that'll do what I want. Yeah. Uses a single line test annotation, test snake case prefix, existing annotations. This is pretty good to go. I think we'll probably end the stream there, to be honest. It's, well, one last thing we can do. We can go down here where we replace the doc block and replace test. And this might be very close to passing. Okay, I would have expected this to pass, so let's try to see real quick why it's not. I'll just spend one quick second on it because I think we can get green here in less than a minute. So what are we missing here? Uses a single line test annotation, test case. All right, test existing annotations, data provider. Yep. Snake case prefix. Oh, here we go. I didn't remove test. So this method is going to need to be just a little bit more robust. I think I'm going to preg replace this beforehand. Let's do that. str2 lower snake name. All right, and let's do name equals this, because we're really kind of going to want to do this twice, to be honest. I think the simplest thing to do here would probably be to just do a double like preg replace. Let's just duplicate that. And this will be name. Let's see if we can get this to pass. Just 2 more minutes. Okay, so the first things first, we can replace test. We know that if it starts with test and an underscore or A to Z, we would be willing to replace that, right? So let's just chop that off on the beginning, and then of course store these. Okay, so let's do that, and then we would really just end up doing the same thing for it. And if we knew that it was at the beginning, I think it would be okay to just say, well, we can't say case insensitive. I wonder, does PHPUnit allow you to put a capital T for your test case names? I mean, it's pretty unconventional, but I wonder if it does. Anyway, let's do I or I here. And then we could get a little funky and trim name with underscores. It's a little bit silly, but that should work. Or well, no, we need to keep the trim down here. Trim this with that. There we go. Let's see if this made it way worse or made it way better. Made it way worse. Variable name. What did I break? Oh, syntax error. Okay, uses a single line test annotation. Great. Test snake case. So it did remove that test portion that we were seeing a minute ago. Test. So that's good. Something is still a little bit off here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a git add dot, and I'm going to copy this fixture and just kind of see what changed. This is kind of a little trick I do with my conventions. Oh, there we go. That's the issue. It has that. So if we could do a git diff -w, yeah, I'm not removing, I removed the test annotation, but the one where it's a single line, it's not smart enough to remove the empty doc block. So I do want to do that, but I think that's a tiny enough thing. And given the fact that this is the second stream of the day, I'm going to skip that portion, and I'll do that offline. So just a recap here, we basically, method names are totally, yeah, I know they're case insensitive in PHP. It's more about the fact of do people, commonly write it that way, and it's a super easy change to fix. Okay, so I think we have the test methods going here, so we can drop that out. So tomorrow, I think Jess and I will work on the data providers and the group bit, because those are things that are definitely going to affect the kind of migration of these test methods. We're probably going to want to do a little bit more with them if you were using group annotations or data provider annotations. So that's what Jess and I will pair on tomorrow, but for the most part, while this isn't necessarily 100% passing, we're definitely closer than I thought. I do want to beef this up with a more complex test case, maybe something that passes in function arguments, something that maybe has function return types on the original test methods, like colon void or whatever. So all that stuff is pretty cool. And so I'll make like a complex test fixture 2 overnight. But for the most part, this is good to go. I'm just gonna, again, strengthen it up just based on my experience working with all the sorts of different projects out there, building Shift over the years. I know there's going to be some goofy things. Yeah, just like in the chat, there's going to be, mixed case, screaming case, all sorts of stuff. So I'll make sure to build a test fixture to make those a little bit cleaner. So thanks you all for joining live. Again, I'll publish the recording of Jess and I pairing tomorrow, probably around 9 a.m. Eastern. And if I have time, I'll do an additional live stream. But honestly, if we can get these two tasks knocked out tomorrow in pairing, I think I'll be able to achieve the MVP by Friday and maybe release a alpha next week going into LairCon. So thanks you all again for joining live, especially those that joined both streams today, and I will see you all tomorrow.